My name's Kelly Yarbrough. I'm the lead administrator for the Tallgrass Artist Residency. It is my honor to welcome Amy Hoagland today. Amy is actually calling in from Boulder today. And so we're excited to test the different internet connection since most of our artists are zooming in from Matfield Green, Kansas, population 50. For those of you who aren't familiar with the program, the Tallgrass Artist Residency invites 8 to 10 artists per year to do 2-week residencies in the small community of Matfield Green. Matfield Green is located just a few miles from the Tallgrass Prairie National Preserve, which is a wonderful resource for the state of Kansas. And we invite artists to do these residencies kind of throughout the spring, summer, and early fall. And then we have all of the residents come back to Matfield Green at the same time in early October for a symposium event and a group exhibition. So it's a very fun time. That event is happening on October 2nd this year. So if you happen to be in the area, we would love to have you out. It's going to be a fun time. We were not able to do that event last year, of course, because of COVID. So we are actually hosting all of our artists from 2020 and 2021. So I think we'll almost, well, at least increase the population by 50%, I think, over that weekend, and probably welcome a lot more visitors in town too. So it'll be exciting. So Amy is joining us today from Boulder. Like I said, she is an MFA candidate in sculpture at the University of Colorado. She is from Louisville, Kentucky. See, I said it right, Louisville. Right? Did I do good? Great. And she has she's done a number of residency programs that sound really fascinating all over the world. I was really intrigued by one that she did at the Marfa Foundation, which is not the Marfa you're thinking of. It's in Marfa, Nepal, Marpha, right? I like that. So Amy's work focuses on the entanglement that humankind has within nature, and she explores how humans' technological advancements are progressing Earth's ever-evolving structure, hence the name of her talk. I'm really excited to hear from Amy, and I think I will go ahead and turn it over to you. Thanks for being here, Amy.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Kelly. I really appreciate that. I will go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so yes, hi, I'm Amy, and I'm going to reshare my screen. 1 second.
As Amy's doing that, I will just mention too, if you have questions along the way, feel free to use the chat to type those questions in, and we'll do a Q&A session after the presentation. So.
Okay, can you all see that fine? Awesome. It's been a moment since I've used Zoom, thankfully, actually. So getting back into the swing of it. And I became interested in the Tallgrass Prairie Residency because its deep connection to place. I am so grateful to have had the time to come out and do this residency. And a huge thank you to Kelly, the McBrides, Derek, and all of the Matfield Green folks for putting me up and making it such a wonderful experience there. It was a short time that I was out in the prairie, but I have so much to process. Even it's been a month since I was there, and I'm still working through the inspiration that I gained during the time I spent in the prairie. And it was really just exciting to see even clearer how art can thrive in such a rural setting. that was really important to me during my time there. The prairie is a landscape one must sit with, experience with, and contemplate with to gain understanding on a deeper level than just simply looking. This is an image of the bunkhouse at Matfield Green, and it's what the McBride's transformed into an Airbnb. So it's really close to the train tracks, so you can feel the trains rumble through as you're standing outside or inside the bunkhouse. I think the train tracks are like roughly 50 feet away, so it's very present. And I, yeah, I just became to love the trains coming by and how it brings you into the present, and is sort of a natural conversation breaker as the train rumbles through. So while I was at the residency at Tallgrass, I was thinking a lot about my connection to place and what that means. This is an image of Kentucky. That's where I grew up, as Kelly mentioned, in Louisville. Um, this is an image from the Red River Gorge, which is about 3 hours south of Louisville. Growing up in Kentucky, I was there for 22 years, and I feel a really strong connection to that landscape. Maybe it's nostalgia, maybe it's the amount of time I spent there, maybe it's my heritage, but that land feels like home. Even despite me moving and living within other places, the musty, deciduous tree leaves smashed into the ground remind me of home. And this is an image from Austin, where I lived for 2 years after leaving Kentucky. And it took me a while to understand and make art related to this landscape. When I was in Austin, I was still making art about Kentucky because I just didn't have this connection yet. But as I've left Austin and moved to Boulder, I have felt a deeper connection within Austin, and I feel the need to have spent time within an area to justify this connection. Time can mean different things, either living somewhere long enough to foster this connection or connecting with a place through human interaction, such as long hikes. And so for the past 2 years, I've lived in Boulder, Colorado, which Boulder is a very stereotypically beautiful, awe-inspiring, sublime landscape. And that has been hard for me to really feel like home and to understand. But I'm starting to, as I'm, working with the environment and learning about it, um, create a deeper connection with it. This is an image I took yesterday, and this is at the Cowwood Forest area near, there's a center called the Cowwood Education Center that does environmental education to kids. And the Cowwood Forest had the largest fire that Boulder County has ever experienced last year in October. And this is actually a hopeful picture. This is from the burn scar area, but you can see the grasses that are coming back since the fire. And this is super important and exciting because the grasses have such long roots that they are helping prevent mudslides and regenerating the landscape. And I've been really grateful this season. We've had a lot of rain, record-breaking amounts here. So that's helping the forest regenerate. And just seeing the grasses yesterday grow and become tall just made me think of my experience up at Tallgrass. So I showed you all these places I've lived and experienced because working outside my studio and interacting with the surrounding landscape is a critical part of my practice. Making in this way is what feels right. This is an image from that residency that Kelly mentioned in Marfa, Nepal. And during my time there, I started to work with light and shadow. They are two materials that are meaningful in my work. I see shadows as a literal representation of our animal-like existence on Earth as evidence of our materiality, just as the same way as all other beings and things, with the exception of transparent materials such as glass on this planet. Sunbeams halt at the presence of our bodies. Our shadows are just one distinct similarity we hold in common with boulders and storm clouds. shadows in this way show the flaws in the hierarchies that Western culture sets from nature by showing that we are also part of nature. And so I have a few videos. Hopefully my connection shows them okay. This is a video uh, where I started to work with shadows and fabric. I was interested in showing the power of the wind passing over various rocks and landforms. This video isn't sped up or slowed down. This is actually how fast the wind was while I was in Nepal. And I was really interested in this because the wind immediately brought attention to your presence of the body in the space of the landscape. Which brings me to this work, and this is a more recent work. So I work a lot within the landscape, and then sometimes I bring objects back into my studio or back into the gallery space and create sculptural installations with them. This piece is called Reflections on the Future, and it involves tree stumps, etch mirrors, and projection of the forest fires from last year. It was created as a response to the two largest fires in Boulder County's history, burning in the fall of 2020. And so there's a projection of the video and it reflects onto the walls surrounding in the space. I'm really interested in how tree rings are catalogs of an area's climate. Through them, we can decipher records of growth, wet and dry season, and the age of a tree. A burn scar signifies a forest fire that the tree experienced in the past and survived. And within this installation, people are also reflected along with the tree rings onto the walls. So you can see in this detail shot, a hand reflected. And this is an image of the reflections that were on the walls that are also moving as they are video. And so I show this because a lot of my work is inspired by 3D scanning. I use a process called photogrammetry where I take multiple images around an object, generally from the natural environment, and then bring it into my studio as a sculpture. So this is a 3D scan of an iceberg. And I'm really interested in the way that the computer sees nature as this harsh triangulated geometry, and that it sees everything, whether it's a human hand, a chair, an iceberg, or a rock at the same pattern. So I continue to create work with that in my practice. This piece is from a 3D scan geode, and it's fabricated out of glass. It's a top of a found and modified surveying tripod. And that's a detail shot of that work. I'm interested in glass for its transparent quality and also for its fragility. This piece is inspired by the triangulated geometries that I mentioned before, and it's installed in a pond to create a full iceberg form. And yeah, I am interested in how the computer breaks down these hierarchies between objects and just sees everything as a unified form. So that's a detail of that. And then this piece, as you may have seen, was one of the images for the talk. It's called How Do They Belong? And it was an investigation between these materials and their relationship. So it is a steel rod frame atop of these rocks that were from Boulder Canyon, locally sourced. The frame was built atop of them, representing human structures. And then they went through a series of processes and understandings of how these rocks should belong. And eventually the rocks were brought back to the site and released from the structure. uh, I was trying to think, how do they relate to each other, and do they belong together? Should they be separate? It was a meditation on human engagement with the environment. Um, this is a recent piece I've done. I've been working a lot with recycled materials, and specifically everyday materials that are found within our houses. So this, the form that is being held up is from a 3D scanned rock that is recreated out of cardboard, and then a mixed media process is used the top of it, involving sawdust and paint, and then it is held up by the steel welding rod structure on top of a mirror, which is providing reflections onto the walls behind it. And I'm interested in using these everyday materials such as cardboard because they're generally not thought as natural, but they are natural. So when you look closer and engage with the form and realize that it's cardboard, but also made from a rock, you think about sort of that connection. And that's a detail of the form. And this was another one of those rock forms that was 3D scanned and recreated through cardboard with recycled paper lichen on top of a mirror. So when people come and interact with this piece, they can see their reflection. Which brings me to this work, which was done at Rocky Flats and just east of Boulder. And Rocky Flats is a space where plutonium was manufactured for roughly 50 years. It was shut down by the FBI in 1990. And this is a tall grass prairie, naturally. So I was interested in, now it's opened up as a preserve. So I've been sort of visiting the site and creating works revolving around the histories of this land, and plutonium contamination still exists there. Plutonium has a half-life of 24,000 years, so it'll be around for quite a while, and just a small, it's very unlikely that you would inhale it just from hiking on the land, but if you do inhale a hot particle, you would likely develop cancer. So I'm interested in that sort of action that is happening there, and was interested in what the the grasses had seen and known that maybe we don't know, what they've experienced beyond the knowledge that we have about this site that we're able to gain through government records. And what was playing on that past video was a government document from the 60s about how to handle plutonium. And within it, they even acknowledge that it's not fully understood how to handle it. So I found that interesting. Which brings me to what I created during my time in the Flint Hills during my residency. And as I mentioned before, I am super grateful for the time I was able to spend there. I just have so much material to process and sort through. The prairie was so inspiring to be within and to see all the little creatures come about and how alive it is. Especially, I was there, I think, the first 5 days it rained. So it was very moist and wet, which I hear is a different experience than what a lot of people have where it's just super hot. But after the rains, all the moisture brought about all of these bugs. And as you walk through the grasses, all of the creatures were just rumbling about and making wonderful sounds. So I was really interested in this like richness that the environment does not have at first glance, but that you have to really understand and sit with and experience to gain understanding of, and contrast to maybe like the Boulder Mountains where you look at and leave. The prairie has, it's just this richness to the landscape. So during my time there, I did a series of relational works to attempt to understand and relate to the prairie on a deeper level than just viewing. And so a lot of these are not fully formulated works, but what I would consider like exercises to relate to and understand the landscape. Um, I think a lot about perception in my work, and this I did a just a few images. I brought mirrors along with me because I work with mirrors a lot, and I was setting them up into this grid form and placing my body within them and trying to understand how my subjectivity relates to the prairie landscape and where I fit in. So this was some of the, I did this on one of my first few days there, just trying to relate to and understand the landscape. And this is just a fun photo of a grasshopper sort of and the reflection of clouds. Um, and this is more of me just trying to, there's also a distortion that's happening here within the reflection. I'm just holding one hand up, but trying to relate my body into and within the landscape. And I'm also using this like grid formation here. I'm interested in how the prairie breaks away from the grid, and I'm using the grid as a stand-in for human development. So when I traveled up to Tallgrass, I brought some scientific glassrod with me, unsure if I would use it or not. And I ended up creating this piece. It's called Blurred Horizon. I use scientific glassrod a lot as more recently as a material in my practice because I appreciate the connotations it has as a material, which relates to scientific lab work and lab testing. And within my own practice, I'm questioning of how our Western science system depicts the natural world as a method of understanding how the exterior world operates through science. I feel like there's a divide that sometimes our methodology of understanding the world in Western practice differentiates ourselves. So that's what I was thinking about when I created this. So when you look through the glass, there's a distortion of the landscape behind it, it being scientific glass. And depending on the time of day or the weather, it looked very differently. So this is just behind the bunkhouse where I was staying. And there's a detail image. I was also experimenting with how it distorted my own body within the glass rods. And I was really interested in how when the trains would come by, there was the blur. So there's always an instant blur of the trains moving very quickly, but then also the blur of the glass rods, even further distorting the images. So I was taking videos of that happening. So the train in a way representing commerce and goods being shipped by, and a reminder of how we send things across the country. And then I also was sort of doing these series of performances where I was walking behind the rods and noticing that my own body really blurs into the landscape and almost disappears into the horizon. And so I was really interested in this as I didn't expect myself to fully disappear, but how the rods really distorted even the perception of myself. And so while I was at the Tallgrass residency, when the sun did come out, I was just very struck by how strong the shadows were from all of the plants, from myself onto the landscape. And I was really curious about this and interested in this since I have an interest in shadows. So similar to previous work that I've shown, I cut fabric, but this time in a grid pattern, and I was taking it out into the preserve and taking videos and images of me holding it above the grasses and the trail. And again, thinking about the grid as sort of a representation of our human existence and um, relating that to the prairie environment. And so this is a video of that act. And I was interested in the shadow and how it was morphed between the grasses, how it's very faint, but also the fabric itself in contrast to the environment. And that is my presentation. So thank you all.
Thank you, Amy. That was great. Really appreciate you sharing such a breadth of your work too, and so many images from your time at residency. I know it takes time to sort through and distill all those things. So thank you for sharing some of that fresh work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we have some time for Q&A conversation, and you all are welcome to use the chat box, or you're free to unmute yourself and come and talk as well if anyone has any questions. I might kick us off here. I have a few questions, but I'll pick one here. One thing that I just want to ask generally about is your relationship with photography or documentation, since a lot of your work seems to be in the field, maybe not all of it, but how do you approach documenting your field work?
Oh, that's a great question. And that's also something interesting because I don't think about it a lot. I think, I'm just fortunate that I am drawn to working with the camera and seeing compositions, that it works for me without much potentially like background training. I haven't had any traditional photography training. I'm just, and I prefer to document my own work because I see the way things are, and I enjoy being able to get out into the field and just envision how things can look. So that is always an exciting part of my work, that I do enjoy the documentation, which is something a lot of sculpture artists say they don't enjoy. So I yeah, I enjoy doing it.
Cool, thank you. Becky Nold in the chat says, such a nice presentation. Thank you, Amy. I'm a prairie girl, and seeing you there is inspiring.
Thank you so much, Becky. That's such a nice comment.
So since you're out in Boulder, and you did the pieces that were first rocks, then 3D printed and created then in cardboard, so I'm not exactly sure how the process sort of followed through, but I just moved back east from Santa Fe, and you're about to have near you another Meow Wolf installation showing up. And in the first one in Santa Fe, the entire forest is made of stacked cardboard. So and it's really a fascinating material. So I'm so interested that you chose to get there through 3D printing, but I'd love to hear more about your process on that. And the artist for that part of the central exhibit is Oliver Polson, but I'll take my answer offline.
Okay, very interesting. Um, yeah, so the process involves me going out, usually on a hike, and sometimes it's planned, sometimes it's me stumbling upon a form that I think is very interesting, and then I'll take roughly 70 to 200 images around the form, and then I use a software which will stitch the images together for me. So the process, all in all, is called photogrammetry. And then from there, I use another software which will help me slice the layers of the rock or natural form or really anything to become able to be cut from a different material. And so for the cardboard, I was laser cutting it. And then essentially I'd end up with this giant puzzle, and then I would assemble it and then work with mixed media atop of it to create an interesting texture that sort of brought it away from just looking like cardboard at first hand.
Excellent. Yeah, we didn't get a laser cutter or 3D printing capability until after the first installation. So it's kind of curious to me, not being involved in the second installation, how much technology has fed into and informed their process.
Mm.
Karen, did you work on the installation at Meow Wolf?
I was a volunteer assistant artist, and I worked there for a while, docenting music shows, that sort of thing. But yeah, it was a pretty phenomenal experience to be a part of that transformation.
Very cool. Any other questions or comments? Um, okay, I have more questions. I always have questions. When you're playing one of your videos, which thank you so much for sharing those videos. I thought they showed up well, so that was great. Yeah. Yeah, the blurred glass, the scientific glass was just really fascinating in the landscape, and seeing how that warped the horizon and your body. That was fascinating. I noticed in one of the videos there's a grasshopper crawling up the glass, and that made me wonder if you ever experience other life forms, other beings using your installations or interacting with your installations while they're out on site, or if you explore any sort of I don't know, observation of your field work over time. I mean, everything you do seems pretty ephemeral in the landscape, but is there ever any sort of longer duration or interaction with those pieces?
Yeah, so most of what I made up to this point has been very temporal. I am working on a longer site-specific installation with the Cowwood Forest, and we're gonna install metal plates that are traced by students from the tree stumps that were hurt in the fire as a memorial to the forest, and that will be sort of a more long-term site-specific thing. But yeah, I was very excited to see the grasshopper crawl up in the video. There's just a different sense of time between the train passing, the grasshopper slowly coming up, and the grass moving that I'm really interested in, that transfer of time. But I have, especially working with natural materials, often come into experience, friendly bugs within my work.
Thank you. We have, oh, Karen says, I love the sense of play and free exploration you bring to your work.
Thank you.
And Anna Nellis Smith says, you maybe spoke to this before I was able to join the meeting, but I'm curious how residencies like Tallgrass specifically support, change, or challenge your work as compared to when you are working from your own space.
Yeah, I love that question. For just going to a new space for me, and I was really excited that I felt comfortable in the prairie making new work, because that's so important to me to have sort of an understanding of place to be able to make, I feel like authentic work would be the right term. So that was it was a little nervous to me at first, coming to whenever I go to a new environment to make work. But yeah, coming to a new environment and having such a short like time there to know if I would really like be able to relate to and understand the place to make work that I felt like was authentic. So that was a challenge. And I just, yeah, I felt like the people I met and the place was very warm and welcoming. And so that really helped stimulate new work in an exciting way. Versus working in my own space, I generally am thinking about the place where I am physically and how I relate to the place and how what is like occurring in the place, especially with climate change, is what I'm interested in.
Thank you. I think it's neat too to see how you chose to bring along some materials that you revisit in different works, the mirrors and the glass and the fabrics. And I feel like that's sort of maybe part of your building visual language that you have going on. And they, they react so differently in different landscapes. That's really interesting to see. But um, it's yeah, it's neat to see what you choose to bring with you too.
Thank you. Yeah.
The glass rods are part of a sort of installation on my porch right now of they really blend in with the other boxes and things on my porch. So they're doing wonderful. I wanted to update you on your friends while you're away from them.
Wait, was that an attempt to like make the boxes blend into the landscape and kind of disappear? Is that?
Yeah. Hopefully people see them disappear too. No, they're doing great.
Yeah, I left a box of the rods with Derek so I could reinstall them in October. But I'm glad to hear that they're doing well and safe and have other box friends. That's good to hear.
Following up on what Kelly was mentioning about this visual language that it has a relationship to materials. So I think, and also Anna's comment about how does the residency kind of support and challenge your work. So there's certain things that you can anticipate because of your relationship and your deep connection with landscape already in these different places. And I'm wondering, kind of anticipating that and bringing the tools and materials, and these exercises that you enact that are sort of like a tuning, perhaps, in a sense. I'm wondering so working responsibly, there's so much about that's really wonderful. And I'm wondering, aside from, I can see you light up when you talk about, like the train or the creatures and things, but were there other things that were a surprise that took you in unexpected directions, perhaps? Or still have a kind of something, I know you're still processing this, but still have some sort of kind of pull into what you're doing now that you're still trying to sort out that's maybe different or might take you somewhere else.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And my answer might not seem, I don't know, directly related, but for me, I just feel like the place in Matfield Green was so surprising and inspiring, and just how the people there and the experience of just being present in that space specifically for me, understanding that in such a rural environment that art is thriving, and there were so many just like such creative things that were happening just along the roadside, and the McBride's land, the Prairie Earth trail, seeing all of that has left an impression on me that I think will take, months, the process, and to think about how that art can exist in such an amazing place like that.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I guess y'all will need to consider a tall grass alumni discussion so you can see what happens later as follow-up. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you.
That's a good idea, Delaney. I like how you think. Well, any other comments or questions for Amy before we wrap up here? I do think it was interesting to see some of the images that you shared of different places you've lived, and a lot of them included rock or stone of some kind. And I guess you can find some exposed rock outcroppings in the Flint Hills, but it's a little different too. It's a little different from
that limestone is so important there. So I was really interested in that. Yeah, I was thinking about the limestone a lot. Just it's hidden, but it's there.
Right. Karen asked, will the returning artists be bringing work that have evolved from their visits? Yeah, so we don't always stipulate that artists have to create new work for the show, since some of them there's only like a month maybe between when they finish their residency and the show, just depending on the timing. A lot of them do bring new work, but this year will be interesting since we have artists from 2020 and 2021 that, half that group has had like a whole year really to ruminate on that experience. So I think it'll be really interesting to see what people bring. And I can say too, just as, this is our 6th year of doing the program, and just through keeping in touch with alumni from the program, it's really, really fascinating to see how different artists' work change over time after they've done the residency. I mean, there's some examples of artists that have done full, long bodies of work that came out of experiences they had at the residency, and that means everything to me as an administrator of the program. And Derek can speak to this too. Derek is my co-manager here, everybody. he's holding it down for Matfield Green here today.
I wanted to ask, you had the one with the train going through. Did you experience the sort of when the sun is down even with the train, and then those light bands that stretch across kind of that path area? Yeah, I don't know, that seemed to connect with kind of what you were doing there. And yeah, I just want to put one more plug out there for the glass rods. I just think they're like the piece, not the ones not that they're on my porch, they're doing fun on the porch, but just I don't know, it feels like there's something about that image that one of the things that comes up a lot out here is that because the prairie is so subtle, and especially when it's like that sort of pure treeless prairie, it's so vast, it needs a foreground element to sort of work in relief to it, and that's just such a compelling foreground element because it's sort of there and not there. And then the part with you interacting with it too was it responded differently than I expected it to. And I don't know, it feels like there's a bunch of metaphors in there. Some of them even like clash into each other. I'm like, wait a minute, is science blurring her with the environment? It's like trying to figure out how they all fit. But excited to see what you come up with in October.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that's another thing. Just the videos, I just have to process them. That's another maybe answer to your question, Delaney, like what will come out of the future. There's so much to process and think about. But yeah, the light flashes from the train, I actually took a video where you can see those, but when I was taking the video, I didn't like them, so I turned it off real quick. But I was looking at that today again, and I was like, whoa, that's so interesting. This sort of also conveyance of the sunlight and time in a different way. So thank you.
I have one more question. Yes, and with these props and the video or photo documentation, do you need a teammate? How do you how do you do these things? Do you take friends with you? And I think it's really fascinating to see these images that for the most part don't contain people that you can see, but you know that there's human interaction there, whether it's like holding the fabric, taking the image. That's so back to my first question. I guess that's the easiest. Do you have help in the field when you do these things?
A lot of the time my help is a tripod and a timer, but sometimes I do bring friends that are amazing, and I'm grateful for them to help me. But yeah, I love my friend with a tripod.
Very good. Trusty sidekick. Well, wonderful. Any last comments before we wrap up? Well, thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon. Really great to see some faces from all over the country. That's wonderful. You are more than welcome to make a trip to Matfield Green later in October. We would love to, or anytime, really, come out there anytime. We got some good fire circle and porch sitting atmosphere, really any time of the year. And I'll tell you what, they really proved last year that porch sitting can happen in any weather when you put your mind to it. All right, Amy, thank you so much for your presentation. Look forward to seeing you later in the fall.
Thank you so much, Kelly and Derek. Thank you both. I'm excited to come back. Really can't wait.
Awesome. Everyone have a good evening. Thank you for joining.